Today, we'd like to welcome Chip Harris. Luther Chip Harris is an ethical hacker, red team leader, penetration tester, and senior cybersecurity administrator for IT and OT systems. As as a red team leader, Chip creates a vision for a company and sets the go-to-market strategy. Chip's primary focus is to ensure that information security becomes a material contributor to his clients' success. As a user player coach, he creates solutions that enhance internal customer operations for their go-to-market solutions and their information security service delivery. Chip began his career in the mid 1990s by starting the first company to provide commercially available cybersecurity services to the greater Memphis, Tennessee area. Later in his career, Chip would travel to over 26 countries building out cybersecurity and secure network environments for Fortune 500 companies and government entities. After 9/11, Chip was chosen as Red Team and Cybersecurity Leader by JSOC and the 501 1st Air Cav Ranger Unit, executive corporate leadership responsible for delivering a $1.7 billion engagement to secure 400 private and military assets, creating a working infrastructure for 65,000 federal and private employees. This was a hybrid cloud-based solution for the United States military in cooperation with the CIA, NSA, DoD, and DEA. This hybrid-based solution helped Chip earn 2 patents for his security designs and software creations with 2 different DevOps teams. He retains the software licensing for software to this date. He has recently published content for the University of Arizona postgraduate program, writing a textbook on counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and cybersecurity. We could go on and on with Chip's various achievements, but let's dig in. I would like to welcome Chip Harris to our show. Thanks for being here, Chip.
Well, thank you so very much. Thank you for the general, introduction, sir.
You bet. Can you give us sort of share your journey into OT cybersecurity and what motivated you to specialize in this field?
Well, the key thing was, when I really started taking a look at logical-based systems, was there's really no cybersecurity in it. That's when I originally started doing this, 20 something
Mm-hmm.
plus years ago. Was, Siemens had their thing, yeah, Snyder Electrical had their thing, APC had their thing. There was no real bridging of the gaps of the intercooperating, operating systems of how these different, things work, how they're all wrangled together, and then how they're all secured together. And OT cybersecurity was not really baked into some of these things. These things were not meant to be put on the internet. Some of these things
Mm-hmm.
are standalone based systems, and for the populace that doesn't know about these things, these logical based systems is what I call the world underneath the world that you never see. Most people don't think about they flip a switch and the lights come on. They don't think about where
Mm-hmm.
it comes from and the cybersecurity that is included into those systems, as well as, they want them available all the time. So they've got to be up 24/7, 365, right? Well, when do you
Mm-hmm.
do patching for those things? When do you do
Yeah.
systems control management for some of those things? How do you do a controlled outage, for some of these things? And when I really started, looking into, and hackers will be hacking. Hackers will always be hackers, and when hackers get bored is when things get interesting and dangerous, So, um, when I started really taking a look at, how do these things actually work, it opened up my mind, because, I had, come from a traditional desktop support and administration background, server administrator, network administrator, but then I really started taking a look at network security, because during the times when, in the golden ages of the 2000s, when, the Y2K bubble exploded, there were a massive series of layoffs of people, in our industry. But not in the OT world and not
Mm-hmm.
into the cybersecurity world,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, there were people out there camping out in front of HR directors' homes, with resumes, and during Y2K, going, "Hi there, hire me. I'm available. I'm a developer. I'm this, and I'm not a developer. No, don't." Will never,
Hmm.
never have been, never will be. I'm really good at running DevOps teams. I can read it all day long, but I can't write it worth a crap, as I
Hmm.
tell people. But when I started taking a look at OT systems, I was going, wow, these systems really don't have any cybersecurity baked into them, and we're putting them on the internet as fast as we possibly can. What can we do to secure all this stuff? And the answers I got were zero.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it was just, and there was no, waterfall back then. There was no
Hmm.
clarities, there was no
Hmm.
nozomis. I mean, it was just like, we put it on the internet and hope it works, and that was the gist of it,
and
and it's,
and
we control.
a lot of times it did work, and it's like, well,
And
what's the problem? It works.
yeah, and it
But
was like, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no
yeah,
evil.
exactly.
It's alive, it's working.
Yeah,
I would not say
exact.
necessarily working that well, but I mean, it was working, and then you had the vendor sprawl, then you had like
Yeah.
General Electric and all these folks doing smart cities and using all these buzzwords and everything. And it scared a lot of people because it's like,
Hmm.
we never really kind of experienced the ability of like how we're controlling and maintaining some of these old analog based systems in a digital frontier. And it was the race to digitize a lot of the OT systems, but they didn't think about the security that was involved with them. And then they stayed proprietary to their own systems. Siemens did its own thing, this company did its own thing, blah 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 blah. There was no way of how we're going to take all of these vendors and wrangle them, together to make them work together to run our water treatment facility, to do some of these different things. And it was kind of scary, in the beginning, and some of these things that actually did change, over time. And we started to realize after, unfortunately, in the United States, we are a very as I say, reactive based society. Until things go wrong, we don't really fix it. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
until we started having, major blackouts and wildfires and,
Hmm.
ice storms that were knocking out massive swaths of the power grid, national power grid, as well as local, power grid and,
Hmm.
cogeneration. Um, and then the internet, came along. I mean, when we started
Yeah.
really pushing, the internet into these systems, that was where I said, that's where I can really make, a really name for myself. Is, I come from a traditional cybersecurity background. I've worked
Hmm.
in the military apparatus. I've dealt with, every kind of thing on the planet. But what's the first thing that bad guys want to do? They want to turn off the power. They want to,
Yeah. Sure.
disrupt human services. They want to disrupt the supply chain. They want to do something that is
Hmm.
going to, basically attack the physical world. And that's a very scary thing, and there's been a lot of case studies, and I've worked with a lot of think tanks, in Washington, and, people, and I said, what happens if we cut off the internet, for like a week? What happens?
Hmm. Sure.
What happens if we can't get water to the East Coast, and there's
Mm.
no power here? I mean, and there's been, and this is stuff in the industry that we've been screaming about for 30 years, and now it's starting to kind of bubble up, and they've
Hmm.
turned it into some horrible movies and, some
Oh
Netflix
yeah.
series and all this kind of stuff, I'm like,
Sure.
and it's just like, okay, look, that is the worst case scenario. Don't get me wrong. But, if your ATM card doesn't work for 3 days,
Hmm.
you're not going to die. If you don't have
Yeah.
internet, you're not going to die.
Right.
Um, at least I'm not. I'm just going to be like,
Sure.
yay, no internet for 3 days. Woohoo, big deal.
Yeah.
But, commerce and, telecommunications and all those things still have to go on. And we've seen everything from low kinetic attacks to, some of the most craziest things I've ever seen that I never thought that were total science fiction will end up
Hmm.
happening if we
Yeah.
don't start securing, controlling, and maintaining our infrastructure here in the United States
Yep.
locally, almost to the national scale. And I've
Right.
talked with many people about this, and that's how I really kind of started my journey, was like going, wow, how am I going to be able to provide to end users and companies and, service providers the best cybersecurity that we possibly can for OT systems.
Yeah. Well, I got a quick question, just for some of our listeners that aren't real familiar. What is the biggest difference between the OT cybersecurity and the IT cybersecurity, and why is that important?
Well, I mean, as I tell people, IT deals with data. You're dealing
Mm-hmm.
with, records, you're dealing with bank transactions, you're dealing with basically your data is your commodity.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're dealing with OT systems, you're dealing with the physical world. You're dealing with power. You're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with water. You're dealing with dams. You're dealing with,
Mm-hmm.
coal fire plants. You're dealing with you name it. Stuff that you really
Yeah.
don't think about. Like,
N-
how do I
nuclear
get clean
nuclear
water?
plants, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, nuclear
Sure.
power plants. Which by the way, there are 53 of those in the United States. And they're
Oh.
building three more.
Oh, there
you
you
know,
go.
so
And
I
somebody
tell
has to
people,
secure those.
we got to secure those. That'd be, 3 Mile Island kind of taught us a little bit about that, but it's like, yeah, let's take a nuclear power
Yeah.
plant and put it on the,
Well,
the internet. No, not a good idea.
we
No, no,
we
don't,
don't
let's don't do that.
we don't we don't want Chernobyl over here, right?
No, we don't. Well, as I tell people, actually, we have had, the United States version of, and this is a very good example. We'll segue here. Very good example of
Yeah.
OT systems failing is Palestine. The basically train car crash they had in East Palestine, uh, Ohio, that caused basically the United States version of a Chernobyl. You had some of the
Mm-hmm.
worst chemicals ever conceived by man that have been
Mm.
unleashed upon a populace. In
Yeah.
a town that's never going to be able to recover from that. I don't care
Right.
how much groundwater, how much air testing and pollutants, that stuff just doesn't magically disappear. And
Yeah.
their whole idea was to set it on fire. So I was like, oh yeah, that's
Oh boy, that sounds bad.
way to go, EPA, way to go,
Here,
kids.
that's
Let's just set it on fire.
and let the
So,
wind blow it downstream,
yeah,
downwind. Oh well.
and we've seen. And I'm not a tree hugging hippie by any means whatsoever. But I am a
Yeah.
conservationist. I believe that
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
should not turn this wonderful, great nation into a shopping mall. I mean, we should, take care of what we got because, well, that's the one thing they don't make anymore. Cheap
Yeah.
land. We got to kind
Oh
of take
yeah.
care of it. So,
Sure.
as I tell people, that was a huge, environmental, disaster, but it was completely fixable if we would have had better railroad standards and better railroad tracks and better stuff that would not have caused this collision to happen because it was OT based. It was not IT based. So that's a very good example of an OT system going awry. So,
Mm.
that had nothing to do with data. That had nothing to do with computers. I mean, it had everything to do with hardware failure, not software failure. And so, as I
Yeah.
tell people, that's just a very good example of when you're starting to take a look at OT systems. And a lot of these systems are old. Most of them are about 20 to 30 years old, but
Hmm.
most of them are made for that longevity, to where they don't have to be controlled and maintained, constantly and upgraded constantly like you do in
Hmm.
IT systems.
Right.
Most of the times it's a 3, 5, 7 year, sometimes 10-year turnaround
Oh wow.
for some of those devices. Now, guess what? Our infrastructure here in the United States, it's gotten a little old. The
Yeah.
last major infrastructure project that we had was 30 something years ago, and I checked into when that was, and that was under the last infrastructure bill that was passed by the taxpayers, that was signed off by Congress, was the first actual 9 weeks of Mr. Bill Clinton's,
Hmm.
tenure when he was first elected. They had a small infrastructure bill that actually got passed that was supposed to help the
Hmm.
states for their highway programs. Now, that didn't
Yeah.
improve water and dam. That didn't improve
Hmm.
hydroelectric. That didn't, do clean energy or coal fire or, any of those things that we, deal with when we deal with power or nuclear, and we have just now in this administration, and I try to stay out of politics, has just
Hmm.
passed a major infrastructure bill to where we're going to start improving those things, which we need
Mm.
to, because they're,
Yeah.
as I tell people, there's nothing political about paving a road. If you want
Hmm.
to, there's a right side and a left side. Woo, there's your politics right
Hmm.
there. But I mean, just pave the potholes in the road.
Yeah.
Same thing,
Exactly.
the water line, fix the water line. There's nothing political about, piping, I mean, at all whatsoever,
Right.
and we have seen, horrible mismanagements of that in example, and we have seen, how those things can, if we privatize and corporatize them, sometimes they put profits before people. The example I give of
Mm-hmm.
that is Flint, Michigan, which is a
Oh,
very blaring example,
sure.
and then sometimes we, don't conserve a lot of the things that we actually have, when we're starting to take a look at, some of the droutages and some of the shortages of water when we should have reserves of those saved up for
Mm-hmm.
crops, irrigation, and human consumption. So,
Sure.
as I tell people, you pay me now, you pay me later, you still got to pay me. You reap what you
Yeah.
sow. So
Ex-
it's just a
Exactly.
myriad of things, as I tell people, that keep me up at night that you people in the normal real world should not be thinking about.
Yeah. Can you describe maybe a challenging OT cybersecurity project you've worked on, and sort of like what kind of strategies you used, or what type of things you went through to make sure that you were able to build some security into it?
Well, I mean, one of the key things that I worked on a lot with the government is, the government uses multiple different methodologies, and the key thing was to say, what is the stand? I mean, we have a ton of laws, that we need
Mm-hmm.
to, and governing bodies that we have to standardize by. And a lot
Mm-hmm.
of it can get very convoluted, and the waters can get
Mm,
muddy real quick, So,
yeah.
are we going to follow? And for those people that want to start Googling, here we go, the 852, 853 series. Do we want to
Mm-hmm.
follow ISO compliance? Do we want to, use
Mm,
the methodology of, the IC can? I mean, there's whole theme parks of stuff that's out there, right?
sure.
So as I tell people, keep it simple, stupid. You know, don't make it overcomplicated than it already is. Just
Mm-hmm.
keep it down to as simple as you possibly can. Those things that you want to be able to break down to fix the system, because the more plumbing you have, the harder it is to fix. The more junk that's on the inside, the harder it is going to be fixed. If you keep it very simple, whatnot. Now, I have found out over my years of doing this is that, I try to get companies to follow the bow tie model, which is a
Mm-hmm.
very
Mm-hmm.
simple
Mm-hmm.
methodology of doing things. And then when we're doing that bow tie model, that works relatively good for OT systems, right? And then
Right.
on top of that OT systems, we say, okay, what regulates us? If, the system breaks right now, and we got
Mm-hmm.
to pick up the phone and start calling people, whom and whom do we call on the government side, the
Mm-hmm.
vendor side, and then on the private side? What kind of manpower am I going to need, staff wise, to fix these certain things? Then what am I going to be facing fines and regulatory, oversight from, right? Because there's always a governing body that's going to look over your shoulder to make sure you're not, hurting the populace, and that you're making sure that the wealth and, the well-being of others is taken care of, which is very good. And
Mm-hmm.
then on top of that, though, too, is that, what laws apply to that, and that's the one thing that everybody gets, really kind of up in arms about, is like, pick one, because, as I tell people, it's a double-sided sword. It's dull on one side, sharp on the other, and then sharp on one side and dull on the other. And here's the reason why I say that is if I choose, certain regulations that follow within this policy for this industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I say
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to follow this matrix based on, what you say that I, am going to be audited on. And I see the reason why I say that is because what you're audited on your risk matrix, and what you're
Mm-hmm.
audited on for your annual risk assessment and your vulnerability assessment, those are the things that you're going to be judged on, you know.
Right.
Now, some of those systems are completely out of your hands. Some of those are owned by vendors. Those vendors might be running off Windows XP Service Pack 1 for that system. You're
Mm-hmm.
not going to be able to change that unless you change vendors, right? And that might be a
Yeah.
multi-million dollar a year change, right? That takes
Sure.
multiple years and costs tons of money to do all that might not be feasible without raising taxes. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that,
Sure.
and if I had all the money in the world, if I still snapped my fingers, it would still take, maybe 3, 5, 7 years to change that system out
Mm.
fully.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sure. Yeah.
so, and you say, okay, we're going to follow the 852, or 53 revisional standards for whatever my industry may be, and since we're being audited on that, let's make sure that we're following those rules and regulations. So therefore, when you come in and you try to beat me up on an audit and you try to say, oh, did your vulnerabilities get fixed? Did your risk get fixed? You have to
Hmm.
say, okay, well, the XP stuff, we're not going to be able to fix, period, until that
Yeah.
system completely goes away.
Right.
But, with the newer systems, this is what we're doing. And we've put that in our risk and vulnerabilities, and we acknowledge that. We've written that down. We will take that as a risk and a
Hmm.
vulnerability. But, the newer stuff going forward, this is what we're doing. This is our plan. This is how we're going to do that. And I try to take a lot of the politics out of it, because and as I say, if I've got the decision making cats and people in the room that can make
Hmm.
these decisions, it shouldn't be a problem. It's the sheer wheel of change that most people don't want to do and have to go through, right? Spending
Sure.
the money, getting the vendors on board. Of course, the vendors want to make money, and I'm God bless them. I love my vendors, and some of them love me, and some of them just hate my guts. But guess what? I will call you out on your crap, because I've been doing this
Yeah.
long enough to know what's the
Sure.
reality versus what's the chaff and, the extra little padded sales numbers that you're adding in there. It's like, I want you to do this and laser in on
Hmm.
doing this.
Hmm.
If you can't fix this, I'll go find somebody else. And that's where they hate me, is because they're like, I'm asking you to fix not to fix the whole world, just to
Hmm.
fix these issues, that's
Sure.
within my environment.
Yeah.
Once I get that done, then we'll talk about some of the other stuff, but right now we're hurting here, and we've got to, stitch up this wound, and we just can't band-aid it, right? We
Right.
just can't
Sure.
keep
Do you
band-aiding and
know,
band-aiding, band-aiding.
has the insurance industry got in the middle of this to try to stipulate certain frameworks or anything like that as of yet for OT
Well,
systems? Do you
since
know?
I deal with federal and state, the insurance companies won't touch us.
Oh,
I
okay.
mean,
Okay.
if it's a private, company or a
Hmm.
city, somewhat, yeah. I mean, they will, but I mean, most of that is dealing with the IT side of the house,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
that is for your IT, cybersecurity insurance in case you get hacked or have a breach or something like that. Sometimes, you got an act of God that's just going to take out your power, or something
Sure.
like that. You can't really insurance, against Mother Nature. As much as I'd love to think you could,
Yeah.
you really can't.
No.
But, there are some things that are preventable, and there are sometimes, that the CEOs and the people that are the owners of the companies or, whatnot need to get drug out in front of Congress and tongue lashed, and, have a little
Hmm.
public execution, because they should be
Sure.
spending your money to protect your infrastructure and your systems. And if they're not doing that, they
Sure.
should be called on the carpet for not doing that. That's
Yeah.
what we pay our monies for, is to make sure that, you're doing these kinds of things, and it does create a very gray line, and it still exists today. And the reason why I
Hmm.
say that is where does government oversight encroach on profitability in business, and then where does business completely encroach on abusing government regulation loopholes, stuff like
Hmm.
that. So it
Yeah.
is a balancing act, in a way, and it can get legally gray, very quick,
Sure.
on where does the vendor's line of, patching and software and security stop, or start in some term, in
Hmm.
some
Sure.
instances,
Sure.
versus what the state and the company should be doing and the government regulation should be stepping in to apply.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Now, Chip, everybody's talking about AI nowadays, AI this, AI this,
Uh,
and it's like, is AI being currently integrated in any OT environments? And then how you might think AI might be integrated into OT networks in the future.
okay, here we go, everybody. Here's my personal stance. It's just a
Hmm.
tool. It's
Hmm.
just
Sure.
another tool in the toolbox. It's not going to replace, everybody and anybody. It's
Hmm.
not going to take over the world. It's not going to turn off, our electricity and blow us up and cause nuclear reactors to explode and what. There still has to be a human pushing the button. Okay,
Hmm. Sure.
So it's just another tool in the toolbox. Calm down, everybody. It's not Terminator or,
Hmm.
there was a wonderful movie that came out, called The Day After when I was a kid growing up that scared the bejesus out of everybody. And
Hmm.
it was a television show that talked about nuclear war, like what would happen,
Hmm.
after a nuclear incident. It had like John Lithgow, had all these great actors in it, but it
Sure.
showed the failure of, what happens if the, alarm system for our, uh, doesn't go off correctly when there's an impending doom
Hmm.
or a
Hmm.
weather, climate based event. What happens if our emergency, towers don't go off correctly and say, "Oh, there's a tornado coming your way." The
Hmm.
emergency, warning. Same thing with, what happens if, we just saw this with AT&T. Is, what happens
Hmm.
if our cell phone service cuts out,
Hmm.
nationwide and no one can get to 911?
Yeah.
I mean, oh,
There
you're going
was
to give
no
me,
warnings about that either, right?
yeah, yeah. Oh, your software patch just, for your problems that you caused, you're going to give all your customers $5 back for. Okay, was that a human decision or was that an AI decision? Was and that was not an AI decision. That was a human based decision.
Right.
AI is not going to kill us all. It's just going to be it. Now, I'm not going to say that it's not.
Hmm.
In certain instances, AI is going to streamline and help streamline some of the industry and take some of the dump clicking out of the decisions that need to be made. Like,
Okay.
if this line loses power, we'll automatically
Hmm.
reroute those lines through
Right.
subcontractors and sub different lines
More
through
like
high power voltage to go to make sure that a given area still gets
s-
power. Okay.
sort of like self healing networks of
Yes.
sorts, huh? Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
when you open yourself up to AI, you're opening yourself up to AI problems.
Yeah.
So you've got a whole nother level of security that you have to deal with, checks and balances, when you're dealing with AI based, systems. And self healing stuff is going to be great. It's going to be a benefit and whatnot. But what happens when you have, like, say, like I do, which I spend lean tissue into the night thinking about these horrible, evil things, is
Hmm.
what happens if you have a nation state that doesn't like us too much, like China or,
Hmm.
let's say Iran or Russia,
Hmm. Hmm.
uses a weaponized based AI to attack another AI system and infect it. And then,
Hmm.
let's say, okay, like in California right now and most of the, West Coast is going through some major, snowstorms, major rainstorms. What if I
Sure.
just decide to, from Seattle all the way down to Mexico, just, and all the way to Colorado, just turn all the power off? I
Yeah.
mean, that's a
Yeah.
bad day. That's a bad day
Hey,
for a lot of people. And a lot of people are going to die.
sure.
A lot of people will get killed. A lot of people would
Hey,
freeze to death. A lot of people.
we in Texas we had 2.5 days of no electricity, and the temperatures were down to like 10 degrees.
Oh yeah,
So
I remember
two
there
and
were
a
a
half
lot of
days.
people
So
there were a lot of people that froze to death, right?
yeah,
And
more
that
than
is,
what the government admitted to, at least.
well, they estimated, so
Sure. Sure.
is, yeah, I know a lot of people just kind of not, yeah, whatever. But it's, it's the same thing. Is that, just because it's convenient doesn't mean that it's secure. So I've said that for 30 years. We have become addicted to comfort. We have become addicted to
Hmm.
pushing a button and have it work and make it easy on us. We have become addicted to, the convenience of not knowing that, maybe I should have, some extra groceries, just in case,
Hmm.
or some extra water, or if you're like me, extra ammunition, because as I,
Yeah.
I tell people, it's like they go like, "Oh man, you're probably some kind of prepper that's got, a bunker." No, no, don't.
Yeah.
No, don't.
Yeah. Gotcha.
They're like, you probably got some, weaponized base bunker in your backyard. No, no, I don't. I mean,
Yeah.
I know that it's going to come back. It's going to take a little while, but I
Hmm.
know that I need to have more than 3 days worth of groceries in my refrigerator and in my
Hmm.
cabinets of non-perishable goods. I know that I
Hmm.
should have some bottled water under my stairs just in case, that there's something that goes wrong. I know that I should have plenty of ammo when bad people try to come over and take, the things that are mine.
Right.
So, as I tell people, that's the nature of human nature, is that, when you get 3 to 5 days, people get pretty feral quick, when they
Mm-hmm.
don't have their creature comforts.
Sure.
Um, and with this generation that's growing up that's not as hardy as mine or as yours, it's
No.
going to be sad. I mean, when they don't have their phones and they can't text or Twitter
Yeah.
or tweet or
Ex-
Instagram or whatever, or
exactly.
Facebook. I mean, it's like, okay, and there's been case studies done that, and I'm not one of those people, because I mean, I use these, medium that's out there today that didn't only exist in science fiction when I was a kid, to
Mm-hmm.
pronounce saying, look, we need to, kind of get our stuff together here when, the evildoers come to try to kill us, that we don't have everything to where it's just literally push button. We need to be able to
Sure.
flip switches and turn knobs. And, is there redundancy of this system if it goes awry, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
completely 100 digitally, dependent on some of these things that we must have. The very good example I give of that is, two of the biggest OT cyber attacks that ever happened, which was Black Energy and Sandworm.
Mm-hmm.
The next one on top of that is, which most people know about, which is called Stuxnet.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at those OT attacks, they were very customized, very tailored, very specific to go out there and do harm, to certain things that affected the real world. And now that we can make that AI based with no consequences and no remorse and no fear, that's
Mm-hmm.
very scary. But
Sure.
on top of that, though, too, is it's also very good to know that we have those tools in the toolbox if we need to use them.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. So, how do you see OT cybersecurity evolving, like, say, in the next 5 years? Or maybe I should say, how should it possibly evolve, or how it should evolve?
In theory, and I say this in theory,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to evolve. It's always one of those hurry up and wait scenarios, especially
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to the state and the government. And until there's a need, and until there's, the don't, if it's not broke, don't try to go out there and fix it kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
But, the we have kicked that can down the line as far as we possibly can. I mean, 30 years is a really good run on infrastructure, but we
Mm-hmm. Oh,
do
yeah.
need bridges fixed. We do need power plants upgraded and updated. We do need, some of these systems that are analog to become digital, and to have, tertiary and, fallback systems, and we do need to be able to upgrade our infrastructure because a lot of this is going to be digitally based. Okay. Now, until we feel that hurt, we don't really fix it, but now we're getting to the point to where these systems are just so old, they're starting to fail,
Mm-hmm.
and since I deal with the government, sometimes that's left up to the state, sometimes that's left up to, the United States as a whole encompassing, you know, entity to fix some of those
Mm-hmm.
things. But, it is also very huge, huge opportunity for people that are, to get into OT cybersecurity, and also job creation.
Yeah.
You can't automate, all of this stuff with AI. It's just now there will be some things like the coding and some of that stuff that will be automated, to do certain things when you tell it to do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But, the key thing is now a lot of the interoperability between some of the different vendor softwares, because Siemens is not meant to, work with Schneider Electrical. Schneider Electrical is not
Mm-hmm.
meant to work with Westinghouse. Westinghouse is not meant
Mm-hmm.
to. So guess what? We're going to see a
Mm-hmm.
really big change in the coding and the basically refining of how these systems all work together. Like, does my
Mm-hmm.
HVA system work with my doors? That works with my elevators? That works with, my security and surveillance systems? That work with, all these other different aspects of power and water and so forth, and fire suppression.
Or
And I mean, if
has
that's
there
what we're
been
going to
any?
see.
Has there been some progress in that area of coming some a same way of communicating? This same way of communicating between different companies' devices, or are they still sort of going their own separate ways?
The answer to that is
Any?
no,
No.
ever.
Okay. No.
The,
No. No
it's literally
standards.
it's literally a buckshot right now of, you pick your own poison. Which vendor are you going to get
R-
in bed with, and then what are you going to have to deal with, over the next
I
5,
see.
7, 10 years? But
Mm-hmm.
we are looking at now the ability now for controlling and maintaining and monitoring those systems, which is
Mm-hmm.
way different than taking over those systems, right? Um, and that is where you're starting to see a lot of that vendor sprawl kind of filtering down into, well, if I pick this vendor,
Mm-hmm.
do they work with A, B, C, and D? If they don't, I don't want them, because
Yeah.
they're trying to take those 30 something vendors and filter them down into like half,
Mm-hmm.
down to like
Mm-hmm.
15. And now those 15 vendors, then they want to, filter it down to about 10. And then now those
Mm-hmm.
10, if they can do it and they can filter it down to about 5, there you go. Then they've picked their own
Mm-hmm.
poison, right? So the
Right.
key thing is that, we're going to look at a lot of changing in coding. We're going to look at a lot of
Mm-hmm.
changes in the cybersecurity policies. We're going to look at a lot of changes in networking, because a lot of these things you have to have level 2 and level 3 networking. The other thing,
Mm-hmm.
though, too, is you're going to see a revision, and this is where I hopefully will see the industry going, a revision on what ports are used and then what
Mm-hmm.
standards are used. Like,
Mm-hmm.
everything doesn't need to be 8080, 8080, 443, 22,
Mm-hmm.
3389, which is bad.
Right. Right.
We're going to look at, we want to monitor net flow, and, we want to turn off SMB 1, 2, and 3, or
Mm-hmm.
SMTP, and
Mm-hmm.
we want to refine that down to where it's only using a couple protocols, because guess what? Less means more.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if we know
Sure.
that those things are being, if we've got to use port 80 and 8080 and 443, which are good,
Mm-hmm.
those are
Mm-hmm.
standard
Mm-hmm.
protocols, we don't
Sure.
need to use all these other ports. We need
Sure.
to trim it down, and
Yeah.
make it more fined and refined down to the
Mm-hmm.
standards which would be enforceable. Okay. So that's one thing that we're going to see.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
second thing,
That's
though, too, is with that level 2 and level 3 networking, that means that we can monitor more net flow. Now, that's a networking
mm-hmm.
thing, and some people don't
Yeah.
want to think about that with OT
Sure.
systems, but OT systems, are very, they got to have heartbeat there, kids. They are down to the
Mm-hmm.
nanoseconds for some of these connection rates that you have to keep. So you're only good and you're only as clean as your network, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you got coding revisions that are going to happen, which is going to make the coding more, simplistic, because we're all using the same language, right? That's a good thing. The
Yeah.
second thing, though, too, is that we're all using the same topology and the topography that we're using. And then the third and the final thing that on top of that would be, dun, 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 drum roll please, is I tell people how we're going to be able to manage those. In other words, we don't want the ability of just having you remote into a device. We want to have
mm-hmm.
a central framework of something that's going to control, maintain, and monitor those systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And once we bridge those three kind of gaps, from either the, like, the vendors do that, or there's a
Mm-hmm.
third party company that does that, they're going to win.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if they want to
Mm-hmm.
slap AI onto it, sure, fine, whatever. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
the new
Mm-hmm.
buzzword of the day.
Sure.
But guess
Sure.
what? The as I tell people, is the same when it comes down to a hardware level, is you have one way diodes. You only have the
Mm-hmm.
information going in one way. You don't have it
Mm-hmm.
coming out. So guess what?
Yeah.
If you're only monitoring it going in one way, that means that, guess what? The bad guys can't bring the data out. So that's another
Mm-hmm.
thing, from a hardware, not necessarily a software standpoint, but from a hardware
Right.
standpoint, that we really need to start taking a look at is, okay, we got
Sure.
net flow going to stuff, we got bandwidth going to this stuff, we got all these kind of whiz bang things, boom, boom, boom. So if we got these, gateways that, are, like Tempered's out there that does this, there's a
Mm-hmm.
whole ton of different vendors that do these, to where the information is only going in single way, only unless somebody goes out there with a laptop and, a Cat 6 cable, and physically plugs into the device and types in all the, password, secret password, and actually gets into the command terminal. That's the only way they're going to get in.
Mm-hmm.
So the data is going to come from that server and services, and that's only, and don't put it in the cloud, please, for the love of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Just keep all the stuff away from the cloud. Just,
Gotcha.
keep it local, kids. Don't
Yeah.
throw it in the cloud. Some companies will scream at me about that, but I don't give a shit. I'm telling you, just don't
Yeah.
don't put all your services in the cloud. You need to keep it hybrid at least.
Gotcha.
Keep it local, for some of those systems, to where you've got the ability to go touch them, and then you've got the
Yep.
ability to go correct them. and you're not dependent, on a service contract for someone to remote into your cloud instance to fix all
Mm-hmm.
your stuff and whatnot. So,
Gotcha.
from a hardware standpoint, is to where we've got it to where the data goes one way in and one way in only, and nothing's going to come out of that system.
Sounds good to me. So, what do you think? Is this a good field for either young people or career changers to get into?
Well, okay. First off, I'm going to speak from history. Is that it's getting, and coming from teaching the stuff and talking about the
Mm-hmm.
stuff, it's getting easier because if you're in
Mm-hmm.
cybersecurity, look at where you're going for your higher education or vocational education, which I'm a big huge proponent for, is that look into these things. If you're into computers, because I grew up in
Mm-hmm.
this. I was born and bred into this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the stuff I was forced into because no one else was going to do it, and there was no really another person that could do it, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
took it upon myself to go learn these things and work with the vendors and learn all the book knowledge. And I started off, as a, maintenance contractor. And then from maintenance
Mm-hmm.
contractor, I kind of built my way up into the cybersecurity world, which took, years to being able to do that. Now it's a lot easier because you've got higher institutions and vocational education that is now teaching these things,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Okay.
teaching OT cybersecurity, and there's degrees and whatnot. But there's also great companies that offer this stuff, and I'm not saying just, you know, take what I say with a
Yeah.
grain of salt. Don't drink as I tell people, don't drink complete the vendor Kool-Aid. Is that,
Right.
there are really great fellowship programs, and mentor-based programs and stuff that out there that these companies offer, like Siemens and General Electric and Rolls-Royce. And I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
name one, Bosch. I mean, they have some really good hands-on, vocational-based training. Because I'm a blue collar guy that's trying to make it in a white collar world. Trust me, I'm as
Mm-hmm.
blue jeans as
Mm-hmm.
t-shirt as it gets. And that's
Sure.
how I started off, was, because I came from that, traditional, hands-on, really wanting to get my hands into it and know how these things work and how these things are put together and what makes this work. And I didn't mind wearing a hard hat and I didn't mind working out in the field, as a field
Mm-hmm.
technician. I really liked
Sure.
it. I mean,
Yeah.
I've worked on oil rigs,
Mm-hmm.
I've worked in manufacturing, I've worked in the
Mm-hmm.
auto industry, before I even got to that, government state level to where, I'm dealing with, bureaucrats that don't know a Cat 5 cable from a Cat 6 cable. I mean, they
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't know any difference if you
Right.
came up, slapped
Sure.
them in the face and called them mama. I mean, they don't
Yeah.
even know what it is. But they're the ones that control the budgets, though,
That's
on
right.
what gets
That's right.
approved and what doesn't get approved. So my job, over the past decade has been taking all this really cool stuff that I know, helping it
Mm-hmm.
put into curriculum, and getting people enthused about, like, going, hey, I know you're in cybersecurity, but have you thought about OT cybersecurity? And they ask the
Mm-hmm.
same question you did. What's the difference between IT and OT? Because they don't know.
Sure. Sure.
Because most of their professors don't know either,
Right.
and
Right.
it's like, same thing. Go to an electrical engineering, or someone that's working in nuclear engineering, or anything like that, and going, hey, have you ever thought about doing cybersecurity for, your passion, which you might be,
Mm-hmm.
electronics,
Mm-hmm.
or, because there's plenty of jobs out there and they
Sure.
pay relatively well. And I've also
Mm-hmm.
said is there's nothing wrong with vocational education. You
Mm-hmm.
eventually, in your lifetime, will need a carpenter, will need a plumber, will need a
Mm-hmm.
welder,
Mm-hmm.
and you will need somebody to work on your power lines, and you will need somebody to help, lay new pipe for, your, housing, that you're going to be able to do.
Sure.
And a lot of this stuff is getting really interesting, because I just watched a thing on CBS Sunday morning, about 3D printed houses out in Arizona, to where
Oh
these
yeah.
guys can literally, within 48 hours, come
Right.
out there and within less than a week, you have a 3D 100% concrete
Sure.
stucco insulated, you know,
Oh yeah.
house that's almost livable in. I was going, wow, that
And
that
and
could solve some of the housing
some of those
crisis right there,
some of those are supposed to be hurricane and tornado resistant too. So
Concrete bomb shelter that I live in. Yeah, I could see that happening, so,
yeah, yeah,
you
sounds
know.
good. So what I was going to say, what type of qualities do you think are essential for somebody to become successful in cybersecurity in the OT field? Is there
Well, you really got to want
anything?
this because it is not going to, as I say, come to you. I mean, you've
Right.
got to go to it. You've got to
Mm-hmm.
pursue it. And when I started doing this, there was no Google. There was no, and there's so much, like, tools out there that you can use with the Googles and the YouTubes and the internets that are out there that you can go out there and start doing research on about what it takes to get into this career, because my 18-year-old self had to physically go learn it from the old timers, the dirty old
Mm-hmm.
wizards. They had to train you
Yeah.
on that stuff, and
Sure.
you had to go through your apprenticeship program and your journeyman program before they would even let you touch some of the stuff.
Mm. Yeah.
Because, when you start messing with these things, they can kill people. That's what I tell the
Mm-hmm.
people is the difference is, these IT systems, you just lose your data. With OT people, OT systems, you lose your life. So it's a big, huge, you're affecting that physical world. So you got to be really careful. You got to know what those lines on the monitors mean. You got to know what those
Mm-hmm.
things that you're seeing and those gauge reading mean. You got to know PSI and pressures and,
Mm-hmm.
how to read an electronics diagram. I mean, that's not handed to you. I can't pour that into your skull. You have to go out there
Sure.
and learn those things, and there's, it's getting very industry specific, as I tell people. So, like, if you wanted to go into cybersecurity for water
Mm-hmm.
treatment, you can do that now.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that for
Yeah.
power. You can do that for, state and federal agencies. It's just depending on what it is that you want to do.
Sure.
And the money is not that bad, kids. I mean,
Well,
having somebody that's graduating from a journeyman program that knows these things, that has a guaranteed job with a six-figure salary, doesn't
mm-hmm.
suck. I mean,
Yeah.
most of us have, worked 5, 7, 10 years to get to that point, um,
Sure. Absolutely.
and now you're coming out, with a guaranteed journeyman program of 3 to 5 years, and then as a pipe fitter or electrician or whatnot, and then say, you know what, I want to start focusing a lot of my stuff into the, industrial cybersecurity industry, and
Mm-hmm.
and how would I do that, in an industrial OT level? So there's a lot of avenues that are starting to open up, because guess what? It's not going away. It's
Yeah.
been there for a
Absolutely.
long, long time.
Sh-
Electricity been here a while. Water
Yep.
treatment been here for a while.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I'm very lucky with the company that I work for. That I work with at a state level, and at a federal level. So it's very interesting, because I don't want to work for the state. I want to work for a private contracting company, because it gives me a little bit more leeway, especially on my
Sure.
benefits and retirement
Sure.
and
Right.
so forth. Because I'm gotten to that age where there's fewer days ahead than they were behind. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
you know I like working for, a contracting company that works specifically with those industries, because, first off, it's never boring. You never see the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
happen repetitively time and time again. If you do, there's something really wrong.
Yeah.
But it's really good, because I get to touch different aspects of, what the state and the federal government are doing. Now, I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with having a state job or having a government
Mm-hmm.
job. Never have, never
Mm-hmm.
will. I've worked those
Mm-hmm.
positions.
Sure.
I just like having the ability to pivot, back and forth in between those, to where it's not just a state thing, it's also a federal thing. It's not just a federal
Yep.
thing, it's a state thing,
Sure.
or it's a private industry thing. So there's a lot of, leniency that goes with that. And the other thing, though, too, is, um, I've been through 2 government shutdowns, and I don't want to be involved in that ever again. So it's really good to work within a
Yeah.
private company, that's
Mm-hmm.
privately, we've got stockholders and whatnot, to where I don't have to worry about a government shutdown ever again,
Mm-hmm.
because I've been in those
Sure.
situations when the government has shut down, and it's like, hey, you're going on furlough for like 90 days.
Yeah.
And no
Exactly.
one ever kind of prepares you for not having a paycheck for 90 days.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So, Chip, hey, I really thank you for coming to meet with us today and to discuss OT systems and cybersecurity. Is there any last words you want to say, or do we got everything pretty much covered you wanted to talk about tonight?
Well, the one thing that when I always in these podcasts is that if you are looking to get into this industry, and I will say this more than once, do your research. Find out what your passion is, what you want to do. Right? Don't do this for the money, because guess what?
Mm-hmm.
It's not about the money. I mean, what
Mm.
I deal with, is a 24/7, 365, job that's open, every day, including Christmas, New Year's holidays, and Jewish holidays. I mean, I am on
Mm-hmm.
constantly. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even on the weekends. things. So, as I tell people, I sacrifice a lot of my personal time for what it is that I love to do. Now, I've got a wife and a child, and
Mm-hmm.
they are the apple of my eye, but they understand that this is what makes me tick. This is part of
Mm-hmm.
my livelihood. This is our livelihood, and this is also, my passion. You can't put a price on passion, as I tell people, but sometimes passion doesn't pay the bills. So
Mm-hmm.
before you pivot into this industry, make sure that you find out what it is that you want to do, and that you have gotten your ducks in a row to kind of get you to that, you know, place that you want to be. Because it is not, I go take a certification exam and then boom,
Mm-hmm.
I've got, six-figure salary. No, this is a
Mm-hmm.
long term. As I tell people, this is a long term game here. This is not
Mm-hmm.
some Polaroid picture. This is a
Mm-hmm.
panoramic. This takes time. And you can't be what I call a paper tiger. You can't take a whole bunch of certification exams and
Mm-hmm.
then magically
Right.
know what it is. I mean, you
Right.
really physically have to get your
Yeah.
fingers into this
You
stuff
bet.
and spend
That
time into it.
sure makes sense. Chip, thank you so much. I certainly appreciate you taking the time to share this with us, and we'll be talking to you soon.
No problem, sir. You have a wonderful day today.
You too. Take care.